The audience had come to see Elvis Presley. They expected the lights, the music, the screams, and the legendary performer who could make an entire room shake. Nobody expected a little boy to make Elvis forget to breathe. The boy stood backstage, trembling. His name was Daniel. He was young, nervous, and clearly terrified. His shoes were slightly too big, his hands were shaking, and every few seconds he looked toward the exit as if he might run away. Because tonight, he wasn't just performing in front of a crowd. He was performing in front of Elvis Presley. His mother knelt beside him. "Look at me." Daniel looked up. "Don't think about the audience." "Then what do I think about?" She smiled. "Why you started singing." Daniel lowered his eyes. That was difficult. Because he hadn't started singing for fame. He hadn't dreamed of becoming a star. He started singing because music made him feel close to his father. His father had been the first person to teach him. They used to sit together at night, listen to old records and sing. His father always told him the same thing. Never sing to make people clap. Daniel once asked why. His father smiled. Because applause disappears, the feeling doesn't. Daniel never forgot those words, especially after his father died. For months, Daniel stopped singing. Then one night, his mother found him beside the old record player, quietly singing the song his father had taught him. That was when she realized something. Daniel hadn't lost the music. He had been carrying it inside him. And tonight, he was finally ready to let it out. The stage manager called his name. "Daniel." His heart dropped. The curtain opened. Daniel stepped into the light. Hundreds of people stared at him. He looked toward the judges, then toward the audience. And suddenly he saw him. Elvis, sitting several rows away. Daniel froze. For one terrifying second, every word disappeared from his mind. Elvis noticed. He leaned forward. Their eyes met. Then Elvis smiled. Not the famous smile from television. A warm, quiet smile. The kind an older brother might give a frightened child. Daniel breathed. The piano began. One note. Then another. Daniel closed his eyes. And sang. His first words were soft. The audience became quiet. But there was something unusual in his voice. It wasn't power. It wasn't technique. It was emotion. Elvis stopped smiling. Now he was listening. Really listening. Daniel continued. With every line, his voice became stronger. The fear disappeared from his face. His hands stopped shaking. Then came the hardest part of the song. The note Daniel had struggled with during rehearsal. He took a breath and sang it perfectly. The room went silent. For several seconds, nobody moved. Then the audience exploded with applause. Daniel opened his eyes. He had done it. But Elvis wasn't clapping. He was staring at the boy. His expression had completely changed. There was something emotional in his eyes. Daniel finished the final verse. His voice became softer. He wasn't trying to impress anyone anymore. He was simply singing. Then the final note disappeared into silence. The piano stopped. Nobody moved. 1 second. 2. 3. Then Elvis stood. The audience erupted. But Elvis didn't just applaud. He walked toward the stage. Daniel watched in disbelief. Elvis reached the edge of the stage and looked up. "Son." Daniel swallowed. "Yes, sir." Elvis smiled. "I think you just scared me." The audience laughed. Daniel looked confused. Elvis continued. "Because for a minute there, He paused. I forgot I was watching a talent show. The laughter faded. Elvis was serious. You weren't performing. Daniel stared at him. You were feeling it. Those words hit Daniel harder than the applause. But then Elvis asked a question that changed the entire atmosphere. What made you choose that song? Daniel looked down. My father. Elvis's expression softened. Where is he tonight? Daniel hesitated, then quietly answered. He can't come. Elvis understood. I'm sorry, son. Daniel nodded. Elvis stepped closer. Did he teach you that song? Yes. And did you sing it the way he taught you? Daniel looked down. I tried. Elvis shook his head. No. Daniel looked up. You didn't try. Elvis pointed toward the stage. You did it. Daniel's eyes filled with tears. Elvis placed a hand on his shoulder. Your daddy would have been proud tonight. Daniel couldn't hold back his tears. Elvis continued. If he taught you to sing from the heart. He paused. Then don't you ever stop. The audience applauded again. But Daniel barely heard them. He was looking at Elvis. And Elvis was looking at him. Two performers from completely different worlds. Yet somehow they understood each other. Later that evening, Daniel was packing his things backstage when someone appeared at the door. Daniel. He looked up. Elvis wants to see you. Daniel froze. His mother looked at him. They followed the stagehand down a quiet hallway. A door opened. Elvis was sitting inside. There were no cameras. No audience. No spotlight. Just Elvis. And the little boy. Sit down, Elvis said. Daniel sat. Elvis studied him for a moment. Do you know why I asked you to come here? Daniel shook his head. Because I want to tell you something. Elvis leaned forward. When I was young, people didn't always believe in me either. Daniel looked surprised. They saw a strange-looking kid with a strange voice. Elvis smiled. But they didn't see what I felt. Daniel understood. Elvis continued. Talent can make people look at you. He paused. But heart makes them remember you. Daniel remained silent. Don't chase fame, Daniel. Why? Because fame is noisy. Elvis smiled. But music can be quiet. Daniel remembered his father's words. Applause disappears. The feeling remains. Then Elvis asked, what did your father always tell you? Daniel answered. He said, never sing to make people clap. Elvis nodded. And what did he say instead? Daniel whispered. Sing because you feel it. Elvis became silent. Then he smiled. Your father knew something. What? Something most famous people spend their whole lives trying to learn. Daniel waited. Being heard isn't the same as being understood. The room became quiet. Daniel finally understood why Elvis had been affected by his performance. It wasn't just the voice. It wasn't the perfect note. It was the emotion behind it. Daniel had reminded Elvis of something he had almost forgotten. The reason he had started singing. Before the fame. Before the money. Before the screaming crowds. There had only been a boy. A song. And a feeling. That night, Daniel went home believing the evening was over. But Elvis stayed behind. He kept thinking about the boy. The song. The photograph of his father. And the way Daniel had stood alone beneath the spotlight. Elvis had heard thousands of singers. But Daniel had reminded him of something powerful. Sometimes the person who changes your life doesn't arrive with a grand entrance. Sometimes, they are simply a frightened little boy standing beneath a spotlight. And sometimes, the greatest star in the room is the one who stops shining for a moment, just to listen. But the story wasn't over. The next morning, Elvis would receive a phone call. And what the caller told him about Daniel would force Elvis to make a decision nobody expected. A decision that could change the little boy's life forever. The next morning, Elvis Presley was already awake when the telephone rang. It was early. The house was quiet. Elvis had barely slept. The little boy from the talent show kept coming back to his mind. Daniel, his trembling hands, his father's song, and that voice. Elvis had heard thousands of voices in his life. But Daniel's was different. It wasn't perfect because of technique. It was powerful because of what was hiding behind it. Elvis reached for the telephone. Hello. There was a short silence. Then a familiar voice spoke. Elvis, it's me. Elvis sat up. What happened? The man on the other end hesitated. It's about the boy. Elvis immediately knew who he meant. Daniel. Yes. Elvis became completely still. What about him? He didn't go home last night. Elvis frowned. What do you mean? The man explained that Daniel's mother had taken him to the hospital during the night. Daniel had become sick after the show. The details were unclear. But there was one thing everyone knew. The boy was frightened. Elvis stood up. Which hospital? The man gave him the name. Elvis didn't hesitate. I'll be there. A few hours later, Elvis arrived at the hospital. There were no cameras, no reporters, no crowd. He walked through the doors quietly, wearing dark glasses and a simple jacket. A nurse recognized him immediately. But Elvis raised one finger. Please. He smiled gently. Don't make a big thing out of this. The nurse nodded. She led him down the hallway. Daniel's mother was sitting outside a room. She looked exhausted. When she saw Elvis, she stood. Mr. Presley. Please call me Elvis. She looked surprised. You came. Elvis looked toward the closed door. How is he? She took a breath. He keeps asking about the song. Elvis's expression changed. The song. She nodded. He thinks he disappointed you. Elvis shook his head. Disappointed me. His voice became almost emotional. That boy could never disappoint me. Daniel's mother wiped her eyes. He doesn't understand what happened last night. Elvis looked at the door. Then maybe I should tell him. He knocked softly. There was no answer. He opened the door. Daniel was lying in the hospital bed. He looked smaller than he had on the stage. The confident little singer from the night before was gone. Now he looked like an ordinary frightened child. When he saw Elvis, his eyes widened. You're here. Elvis smiled. I told you I'd see you again. Daniel looked away. I'm sorry. Elvis walked closer. For what? I couldn't stay. Elvis sat beside the bed. Son, you don't have to apologize for being sick. Daniel remained quiet. Then he whispered, Did I ruin everything? Elvis looked at him. No. Daniel's eyes filled with tears. You didn't ruin anything. Elvis leaned closer. You gave everyone something they won't forget. Daniel shook his head. I was scared. I know. My voice was shaking. I know. I almost forgot the words. Elvis smiled. But you kept singing. Daniel looked at him. That's what matters. For a while they sat in silence. Then Daniel asked something Elvis wasn't expecting. Did my father ever hear you sing? Elvis looked surprised. No. Daniel looked down. He liked you. Elvis smiled. Your father had good taste. Daniel laughed for the first time. The room became warmer. Then Daniel reached beneath his pillow. He pulled out an old photograph. It was the same photograph Elvis had seen the night before. Daniel handed it to him. This is my dad. Elvis looked at the picture. A young father. A small boy. Two people standing together. Elvis stared at it for several seconds. Looks like a good man. He was. What did he do? He worked all the time. Daniel smiled faintly. But every night he came home, he sang. Elvis handed the photograph back. Then he gave you something more important than money. Daniel looked confused. What? A reason to remember him. Daniel's eyes filled with tears. Elvis put a hand on his shoulder. That's a gift. Before leaving, Elvis asked Daniel a strange question. Do you still have your father's record? Daniel nodded. At home. Good. Why? Because I want you to keep it. Daniel looked confused. I was going to. Elvis smiled. No. He leaned closer. I mean keep it forever. Daniel nodded. Then Elvis stood. I'll see you again. Daniel looked worried. Really? Really? Elvis walked toward the door. Then Daniel called out. Elvis. He turned. Yes. Do you think I can sing again? Elvis smiled. I don't think you can stop. But when Elvis stepped into the hallway, his expression changed. Daniel's mother was waiting. She looked at him. You know he may never perform again. Elvis stared at her. Why? The doctors aren't sure. Elvis was silent. She continued. His illness has been getting worse for some time. Elvis looked back toward the room. How long? We don't know. That answer hit him harder than he expected. Elvis had spent his life surrounded by people who wanted something from him. Money, fame, autographs, photographs. But this little boy wanted nothing. He only wanted to sing. And suddenly Elvis understood something. Daniel didn't need another performance. He needed a reason to believe tomorrow was worth reaching. Elvis looked at the mother. What does he dream about? She hesitated. He wants to sing on a real stage. Elvis smiled faintly. Then maybe we should give him one. That evening, Elvis made a telephone call. Then another. Then another. He spoke to musicians. He spoke to people connected to the talent show. He spoke to someone who could arrange a small private performance. Nobody understood why. Why would Elvis Presley spend his time arranging a stage for a little boy? But Elvis didn't care. He remembered being young. He remembered people telling him what he couldn't become. He remembered standing on stages before anyone knew his name. And he remembered how one person's belief could change everything. Daniel needed someone to believe in him. So Elvis decided to become that person. 3 days later, Daniel's mother received a strange envelope. There was no long explanation. Just a note. She opened it. Inside were 2 tickets. And a short handwritten message. For Daniel, the stage is waiting. Her hands began to shake. She immediately called the hospital. Daniel was resting when she entered the room. Daniel. He opened his eyes. What? She sat beside him. "Someone wants to see you." "Who?" She smiled through her tears. "Elvis." Daniel sat up. "What?" She handed him the note. Daniel read it once. Then again. His eyes became wide. "He wants me to sing." His mother nodded. Daniel looked toward the window. For the first time in days, his face changed. He smiled. A real smile. But there was one problem. The doctors had told his mother that Daniel wasn't strong enough to perform. And Elvis didn't know that yet. The night of the performance arrived. The theater was small. Nothing like the enormous venues Elvis usually performed in. There were no screaming crowds. No television cameras. Only a few musicians, some staff members, Daniel's mother. And Elvis. Daniel stood backstage. His hands were shaking again. Elvis walked toward him. "You're nervous?" Daniel nodded. "Very." Elvis smiled. "Good." Daniel looked confused. "Good." "Of course." "Why?" Elvis leaned closer. "Because if you're nervous, it means you care." Daniel smiled. Then Elvis noticed something. The boy was struggling to breathe. "Daniel." "I'm okay." Elvis looked toward his mother. She looked away. Elvis understood. The doctors had been right. Daniel wasn't ready. But Daniel looked at the stage. "I want to do it." Elvis looked at him. "Are you sure?" Daniel nodded. "I promised my father." Elvis was silent. Then he placed both hands on the boy's shoulders. "Then don't sing for me." Daniel looked up. "Who should I sing for?" Elvis smiled. "Sing for your father." The curtain began to rise. The lights came on. Daniel stepped forward. Elvis remained backstage. The first note began. Daniel opened his mouth and sang. His voice was weaker than before. But somehow, it sounded even more powerful. The audience became silent. Elvis closed his eyes. For a moment, he wasn't watching a little boy. He was listening to someone who had turned pain into music. Daniel reached the final verse. His breathing became harder. His mother stood up. Elvis opened his eyes. Something was wrong. Daniel continued anyway. One line. Then another. Then the final note. He finished. The audience stood. Elvis began clapping. But Daniel suddenly stopped moving. His eyes closed. His knees weakened. And before anyone could reach him, he collapsed on the stage. The applause died instantly. Elvis ran forward. "Daniel!" He caught the boy before he hit the floor. Daniel was unconscious. His mother screamed his name. The musicians froze. The lights remained shining above them. And Elvis Presley, holding the little boy in his arms, looked toward the audience with tears in his eyes. For the first time in his career, Elvis Presley didn't know what to say. Then Daniel's hand moved slightly. His lips barely opened. He whispered one word. "Father." And Elvis heard it. But what happened next would change the story forever. The theater had gone completely silent. Daniel lay unconscious in Elvis Presley's arms. Only moments earlier, the little boy had been standing beneath the lights, singing for his father. Now the same stage was filled with panic. Daniel's mother rushed toward him. "Daniel!" Elvis carefully lowered the boy onto the floor. "Call the doctor." Someone ran backstage. The musicians stood frozen. The audience didn't know what to do. And Elvis Presley, a man who had performed through exhaustion, pain, and thousands of screaming fans, suddenly looked terrified. Not because he was Elvis, because he was holding a child who had trusted him. A few seconds later, a doctor rushed onto the stage. Everyone stepped back. Elvis didn't move. He remained beside Daniel. The doctor checked the boy, then looked toward his mother. "He needs to go to the hospital immediately." Daniel was carried away. His mother followed. Elvis stood alone beneath the spotlight. The audience remained silent. For once, nobody was asking Elvis to sing. Nobody wanted a performance. They simply watched him. Elvis looked toward the empty place where Daniel had been standing. Then he whispered, "Come on, kid." The ambulance disappeared into the night. Elvis followed. At the hospital, Daniel was taken into an emergency room. His mother sat outside. Elvis sat beside her. Neither spoke. Minutes passed. Then an hour. Then another. Finally, the doctor came out. Daniel's mother immediately stood. "How is he?" The doctor took a breath. "He's stable." She closed her eyes. A wave of relief passed through her. "But—" Elvis looked up. The doctor continued, "He's very weak." Daniel's mother nodded. "We knew." The doctor looked at Elvis. "You shouldn't have let him perform." Elvis lowered his eyes. "I know." There was no excuse. No explanation. Elvis had wanted to give Daniel one unforgettable moment. But he had forgotten something important. Sometimes love means knowing when to stop. Several hours later, Daniel woke up. The room was dark. He slowly opened his eyes. His mother was sleeping in a chair. Daniel looked around. Then he saw someone sitting beside the window. "Elvis." Daniel smiled faintly. "You stayed." Elvis looked over. "Of course I stayed." Daniel tried to sit up. Elvis gently stopped him. "Easy." Daniel looked worried. "Did I finish the song?" Elvis smiled. "Yes." "Did people like it?" Elvis laughed softly. They stood up. Daniel smiled. "Really? Really?" There was a long silence. Then Daniel asked, "Did I disappoint you?" Elvis's face changed. "No." "Are you sure?" Elvis moved closer. "Daniel, listen to me." The boy looked at him. "You could have forgotten every word." Daniel listened. "You could have missed every note." Elvis placed a hand on his shoulder. "You could have stood there and said nothing." He smiled. "And I still would have been proud of you." Daniel's eyes filled with tears. Elvis continued, "You don't have to prove anything to anybody." Daniel whispered, "But I wanted to make you proud." Elvis shook his head. "You already did." For several minutes, neither of them spoke. Then Daniel reached beneath his blanket. He pulled out his father's photograph. "I wish he could have seen it." Elvis looked at the photograph. "So do I." Daniel stared at the picture. "Do you think he heard me?" Elvis didn't answer immediately. Then he smiled. "I think he did." Daniel looked at him. "How do you know?" Elvis leaned back. "Because some songs aren't just heard with ears." Daniel smiled. "They're heard here." Elvis touched his chest. Daniel held the photograph tightly. For the first time since his father died, he didn't feel completely alone. The next morning, Elvis returned to the hospital. But this time he brought something. A small wooden box. He handed it to Daniel. "What's this?" "Open it." Daniel lifted the lid. Inside was a simple microphone. Daniel stared at it. For me. Elvis nodded. I want you to keep it. Daniel touched it carefully. Why? Because one day, when you're strong enough. Elvis smiled. You're going to use it again. Daniel looked uncertain. What if I'm not good enough? Elvis laughed. That's not your problem. What is? Your job is to keep singing. Daniel smiled. Elvis pointed at the microphone. Not for fame. Daniel nodded. Not for applause. Daniel nodded again. For the feeling. Elvis smiled. Exactly. Weeks passed. Daniel slowly became stronger. He wasn't suddenly cured. There was no miracle. No magical ending. His recovery was slow. Some days were good. Some were difficult. But something had changed. Daniel started singing again. Quietly. At first only in his room. Then for his mother. Then for the nurses. Eventually, he sang for other children in the hospital. And every time he sang, people stopped what they were doing. Not because he was famous. Because his voice made them feel something. Elvis continued to send letters. Short letters. Simple letters. Sometimes only a few words. Keep singing. Stay strong. Remember why you started. Daniel kept every one. Years later, those letters would become some of his most valuable possessions. But there was one letter he treasured above all the others. It arrived several months after the talent show. The envelope had Elvis's name on it. Daniel opened it carefully. Inside was a handwritten message. Elvis had written, "The world may forget the song you sang that night. It may even forget my name one day. But never forget what happened when you sang from your heart. That is something nobody can take away from you." Daniel read the letter several times, then placed it beside his father's photograph. Two memories. Two men. One song. Years later, Daniel would become a musician. Not because Elvis made him famous. Elvis never promised him fame. Instead, Elvis gave him something much more valuable. Confidence. The courage to continue. The understanding that music wasn't about standing above people. It was about reaching them. Daniel never forgot the night he met Elvis. He never forgot the stage. He never forgot collapsing beneath the lights. But most of all, he never forgot what Elvis told him in that quiet hospital room. You don't have to prove anything to anybody. Those words followed him throughout his life. Whenever he was nervous before a performance, he remembered them. Whenever someone told him he wasn't good enough, he remembered them. Whenever applause became more important than the music, he remembered his father's voice. Never sing to make people clap. And Elvis never forgot Daniel either. For a man who had met presidents, actors, musicians, athletes, and millions of fans, the little boy from that talent show remained different. Because Daniel had reminded Elvis of something fame could easily make a person forget. Why he had started singing. Not for the money. Not for the cameras. Not for the screaming crowds. But because somewhere inside a young boy, there was a feeling that needed a voice. Many years later, Daniel stood on another stage. This time, he wasn't a frightened child. He was an experienced performer. The lights were brighter. The audience was larger. And the microphone in his hand was the same one Elvis had given him. Before beginning the song, Daniel looked toward the empty seat near the front. There was a photograph sitting there. His father's photograph. Daniel smiled. Then he looked toward the microphone and whispered, "Thank you." The music began. He closed his eyes. and sang, not for applause, not for fame, for his father, for the frightened little boy he had once been, and for the man who had stopped everything just to listen. Elvis Presley. The story of that night was never really about a talent show. It wasn't about winning. It wasn't even about Elvis Presley. It was about a simple moment between two people, a legendary performer, and a little boy who reminded him why music mattered. Elvis had entered that room as the biggest star in the building. But when Daniel began to sing, he became something else, a listener. And perhaps that was the greatest thing Elvis could have given that boy. Not a record deal, not money, not fame, just his attention, just his belief, just the words, keep singing. Because sometimes one person's belief is enough to change another person's entire life. And sometimes the most powerful performance isn't the one that makes an audience scream. It's the one that makes a legend stop, listen, and remember who he was before the world knew his name. That night, Elvis Presley didn't discover a star. He discovered something much more important, a reason to believe in the power of a song again. And Daniel, he never stopped singing, not for the applause, not for the fame, but for the feeling, just as his father had taught him, and just as Elvis had reminded him. Because applause disappears, but the feeling remains.